The Florida Podcast Network, the voice of Florida.
From Mallory Square in Key West to the Governor's Mansion in Tallahassee and all points beyond, you're listening to the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com, your source for all things related to the craft beer community in the Sunshine State. And now your host, Dave Butler.
Hey there. Welcome to another episode of the Florida Beer Podcast, powered by FloridaBeerBlog.com. This is Dave, your host and author. We are going to be ignoring beer for the next couple of episodes because I can do that from time to time. It's kind of cool. Anyways, before we get started, once again, make sure to find us on social media. We are at Florida Beer Blog on Instagram and Twitter, at FL Beer Blog on Facebook. We are on the webs at FloridaBeerPodcast.com, FloridaBeerBlog.com, which is where you'll see a lot of our articles and recaps and whatnot. We're also a proud part of the Florida Podcast Network, and you can find them on Instagram. You can find them on Facebook. You can find them at FloridaPodcastNetwork.com. You can even join the FPN Insiders group on Facebook and get all sorts of awesome details about new episodes that are coming up. That's FPN Insiders. Just do a Facebook search for that and you'll find them. All right, so we are going to be talking about Mezcal for the next couple of episodes. And what is Mezcal? Long story short, it's like tequila. There are some significant differences between the two in terms of the source material, shall we say, and how it's made and where it's made. The reason that I am bringing Mezcal up is a couple months ago, we, the team and I, were able to go to the very first Mezcal Lauderdale event. This was an event at Le Meridien in Dania Beach, very, very close to Fort Lauderdale International Airport, and was put on by Frances Antonio Martineau. She is the brains behind the FemAle Brew Fest in Fort Lauderdale, the nation's premier beer festival focusing exclusively on women in the brewing industry. She and her husband have recently gotten into Mezcal, and they created what was an amazing event. A lot of different kinds of spirits, obviously all Mezcal-ish, Mezcal-based, not a tequila in sight, which made me very, very happy. And there was a lot to learn and a lot of really cool people to speak to. And of the people that I spoke to, I'm going to be interviewing a few of them for this podcast. This wasn't actually recorded live at the event. It was way too loud and way too crazy for that, but I was able to get some phone calls in, record them from the studio, and give you a little bit of background into this amazing spirit. The first people that we are going to speak to is Xicaru. And I know that it's got that X at the beginning. Well, how do I pronounce that? Well, that's how it's pronounced, Xicaru. We're going to be speaking to Dennis Barnett. He is a partner at DC Craft Spirits. They are the exclusive importer of Xicaru mezcals here in the United States. And he's going to give us a good rundown of what mezcal is, how it's made, some of the different, what they call expressions in the mezcal industry, including an amazing mole mezcal. You've got to, if you can find this one, definitely seek it out, definitely try it. But we'll be speaking to him about that as well. And then some awesome things that he and his team at DC Craft Spirits are able to do to give back to the mezcal producers in Mexico. So find whatever drink you're going to drink. Doesn't matter what it is. It could be beer, could be tequila, could be mezcal. I'm definitely going to see if I can find some mezcal myself. Sit back and enjoy. And I will admit the first thing that I thought of with mezcal is I didn't actually know what it was, but it seems to be that everybody connects it to tequila, but it's not tequila. This is a completely different spirit altogether. So I guess what's the big difference?
Well, there's there's a few differences, and actually tequila started as mezcal, right? So what makes them different today is the denomination of origin, right? So like champagne and sparkling wine, champagne has to come from an area in France. Otherwise, if it's made outside of that area, it's called sparkling wine. So tequila was the first to get a denomination of origin. Mezcal filed secondly. And so there are 5 states in which you can make tequila and call it tequila. Okay. If you make a tequila-like product outside of those 5 states in Mexico, it will be called an agave spirit. For mezcal, there are 9 states that the regulatory agency recognizes in which you can make mezcal. There are actually 13 states that the government recognizes, but the regulatory agency in Mexico does not. So we know that there are 13 states, but only 9 are recognized at the moment. Tequila primarily comes from Jalisco. That's what most people would say that's the only place, but that's not the only place. It's 85% pretty much of all tequila made comes from Jalisco. The same is true likewise for mezcal. 85-90% of mezcal that is produced comes from the state of Oaxaca. Okay, that's number one. So denomination of origin. Number 2, which is a huge difference, is the type of agave that by law and by tradition is allowed to be used. So tequila uses the plant Blue Weber, whereas mezcal is permitted to make spirit from any type of agave that will produce enough complex sugars to convert to alcohol. So there's about 300 species of agave in Mexico, give or take. Of those 300, about 60 would actually chemically qualify, meaning that there's enough compound sugar to convert to alcohol. But I reduced that significantly because of the time it takes for some of the agave plants to mature. And number 2, the availability of supply. So many of the agaves that one could make a mezcal from are just so they're wild and it's so limited or it takes a long time to mature. We, for Xicaru today, we use espadín. Espadín is very hardy, likes water, likes sun, is very naturally resistant to the environment. And most mezcal today is coming from that espadín plant. It's a very sweet plant.
I was going to say, so is it more like grapes to where you have a different agave and that'll give you different qualities? Or does it seem to be more like coffee where you can have several different kinds of coffee bean, but most people use Arabica?
Yeah, it's like winemaking and similar to coffee making in that each of the varieties have very unique characteristics, flavor, sugar content. Some express terroir more aggressively than others. So espadín is 7 to 8 years. Some of our plants take 10 because we're not doing any modification. It's all Mother Nature. So no chemicals, no fertilizer, no pesticides, etc. We don't even water. We're just basically stewards of the land, and we cultivate. We use cultivation practices during the 8 to 10 years for various different reasons at various different times. We just made our first limited batch of a variety that's known by the name Tobala. And Tobala has less sugar, takes much longer, 12 to 15 years to mature, and is very small in size. Takes about 15 times more of the plant itself to make a batch than we would normally take with espadín. So to me, the interest from my point of view is that mezcal is much more like wine in that there's a variety of maguey or agave that we can use. Therefore, you can express different flavors and such. And we, much like wine, we harvest based on sugar content. So we don't take an entire field like some of the bigger, higher volume tequila makers and mezcal producers will take the field, right? We are much more cautious and careful about that because we look at plants as though they were people, because they act like we act, or we act like they do. You can have plants right next to each other, same sunlight, same moisture, same terroir, and they just don't all mature at the same time. So we want quality and consistency. So we will take plants when they hit a certain level of bricks or level of sugar.
Nice. So you've got obviously the product in mind. How did you know that you found the right people and the right location, and especially your master distiller, a gentleman by the name of Fernando Santibanez? How did you know that those are the right people to bring Xicaru to life?
It's an interesting story. So Fernando is from Oaxaca originally, and he is a chemical engineer by education and went to work for Bacardi International in Mexico and worked his way through the ranks on the production side and was the master distiller of all Bacardi products produced in Mexico. So he was one of a very few number of people worldwide that was trusted with Bacardi's recipes for all the products that they make. And they make some products in Mexico that they don't make in other places. So he had a very wide portfolio, number one. Number two, having been in that position and, in a very influential position within Mexico, he was able to work very closely with the CRT, which is the regulatory agency for tequila, and the CRM. And so when we started talking about creating a brand, his family had a recipe which they had been using for many, many generations that we modeled the Xicaru silver after. And so there was already knowledge, within the community of which families were growing agave the way we wanted it to be grown. And then as a second checkoff, Fernando worked with the CRM to go back and look at records to make sure that there had never been chemicals used and such. And then Fernando just got in a taxi and went family to family and interviewed them and, asked them questions, got to know them, walked the fields. And so, he was really the spearhead of aligning our partners. Basically, we land lease. And as such, then the individual families adopt our guidelines, which is not easy to go into a very masculine industry and one that families have been farming for hundreds of years and say, hey, we want you to do it this way. And, there wasn't a whole lot of changes. We didn't change any of the real techniques. It was just, making sure that we were consistent in everything we did and we had an alignment in terms of how we wanted to go forward. And it was a very important decision for us as well as those families, because most of them were just making very small quantities of mezcal for their village or their family. So they were growing corn and other annual crops, and we wanted them to grow just mezcal. So, imagine saying you need to plant that field that you just harvested with agave, and you won't be able to harvest it for 8 to 10 years, and therefore your income stream is going to be a little different for a while. And that's, I think, Fernando's one of the biggest accomplishments was being able to talk with the families and convince them that was the right thing to do, and that in short order they would be making more money and their life would be a lot more consistent.
And you had also mentioned that it's not just about making the mezcal, but also there's a very strong philanthropic arm to you and to the company and to be giving back. Can you describe that a little bit?
Sure. We were committed to finding a way to give back to the local community. And in Oaxaca, it's very rich in culture and tradition, but economically, it's, if not the poorest state in Mexico, it's the second poorest state in Mexico, and starving for formal education. Their average level of education when we started this was about third grade, right? So they work or they're used for other purposes, sex trafficking, such and such. So Fernando's mission was to find something that we could contribute to the local community that would make an impact, not just to give some people some money. We wanted to make an impact. And he called one day very excited. He said, "You've got to come down. I found the perfect way to give back. It's a orphanage in Lacalula, which Lacalula is nearby one of our plantations and one of our distilleries, one of our original ones." And so I got excited, flew down, and the individual that was running the children's home at that time, an American, Jill from Chicago, and she met with us and we told her our story and we were all excited. I mean, I can't tell you how heartwarming it was. I got out of the car before we turned off the paved road and I walked the dirt road, and I had this imagination or this idea in my head that, a children's home or orphanage would be really dark and dreadful. But what I heard was children laughing, music, balls bouncing, just, genuinely joy. And when I made the corner and I saw the buildings and saw the kids out playing in the field, man, I was just like, this is it. This is absolutely it. And we met with Jill and she showed us around. And then she said, "I cannot accept your money because you make alcohol. These kids that are here because of drugs and alcohol and crime, and that we would take your money." And it was heartbreaking. And I pleaded with her that, we aren't going to exploit these kids in any way for any purpose other than to help. And if you want pencils, we'll give you pencils. You want pillows, we'll give you pillows. We'll give you money, whatever. We want to do this. And she said no. And so very disappointed, came back to the United States, started, writing Jill about our family here and how we live and what we do in the community. And every time I went down to Oaxaca, I would go by and see her. And about the fifth visit, she said, "You know what? I'm going to introduce you to the founders of the children's home. And if they ask me for a recommendation, I'm going to say yes," which was unbelievable.
Awesome. Yeah.
Now, the unique thing about it is the founders live about 5 miles from where I'm at right now in California. And I was that close and I didn't know them. And so it was just one of those things that was meant to be. And so I met them and they said, "Absolutely." And I said, "Can I look at your books?" And they kind of looked at me funny and said, why would you do that? And I said, "Because we have a standard of 80% of the money going to the children in this case." And they said, "Absolutely." And in fact, 90% of the contribution goes to the kids. So it was a perfect match. And the need that was greatest at that time was education. And we were happy to participate. So the first thing we did was help buy some vans, right, to get the kids into town because this children's home is a little remote. And so that worked for a couple of years. And it was like teachers in Oaxaca strike frequently. And so it was like, boy, we're just kind of not getting where we need to go here. So the idea was, let's build a school. So it took some time and some money, and others helped join in. We just, said, let's do this. So there is a school that takes care of the kids right there on the campus from kindergarten to seventh grade. We're still busing or taking kids into town for high school at this moment. The high schools are better than the elementary schools. So we've had a significant impact on that community through fostering a pathway for kids to get a formal education. And the interesting part about this is kids get dropped off without any notice, right, in the middle of the night, or they just get dropped off on the road. And they come to the orphanage at various different ages. And so they're tested out to see what grade they're really in. So, there's some kids that come in there at 16, 17 years old that test out like a first grader. And it's not uncommon, right? The age and the grade level are not in concert with one another like it is here. So that was the first challenge that the school had to face. Like, how do we deal with this? You can't have 16-year-old kids in with 5-year, 6-year-old kids. It just doesn't work. So you look at the United States, we can't figure this out, but just out of necessity, it was like, okay, let's do an accelerated class. So one-on-one teaching for those kids that are behind their grade level and get them up to speed. Intense learning so that they can go back into the classroom with those people that are, similar ages and such. And so that program really took off right as COVID was hitting, in which we would formalize testing, find out where they are, and then sit with them one-on-one and accelerate their learning to the point where they can catch up pretty quickly. And you can't even imagine what that does for self-esteem and self-worth. It's just incredible. So we've got some kids now that are in college that started way back when, and many of them do come back to the community and help the community improve. So we're really gratified by that.
That is so cool. And obviously all of that is sort of based on the product that you have and being able to give back to that. With the product, with the Xicaru, how has it been taking off here in the United States? Has it, and Mezcal in general, really been exploding over the past months or years?
Yeah, it has. I mean, I have to tip my hat to Ron Cooper Del Maguey, who 25 years ago or so walked up and down the streets of the United States with some crazy product called Mezcal. And he was really a pioneer, trailblazer. But Mezcal really didn't have much awareness throughout the United States for many years. I mean, in the last 10 years, there's just a little bit of knowledge. And most people refer to it, as that spirit with the worm in it. And, if you live in California, chances are you've been to Mexico enough where you encountered some bad Mezcal. And so there was just a lot of opportunity to educate the consumer. And like you said, or asked me earlier, like, what's the difference between tequila and Mezcal? People still call Mezcal tequila, right? The word Mezcal actually means cooked agave. So tequila is steamed, and Mezcal, by tradition, by law, has to be cooked. So it's smoky. And many of the early consumers didn't like Mezcal because it was just too smoky. It was like falling into a campfire. And so, our approach for Xicaru is balance. And everything that we do is driven by tradition and balance. So you can actually approach the spirit neat. We make it to be consumed neat, but that's not how most people drink it in this country. It's in a cocktail. But yeah, so the last 10 years, the category has grown significantly. It's still tiny compared to tequila, but it's rapidly growing, and we have tons of upside potential. And I think the fact that there's so much variety with Mezcal, that it's like, if you like Cabernet, you've got a lifetime of exploring to do. If you like Pinot Noir or Chardonnay or any other variety, that's what Mezcal is like. You find your favorite, but there's so many interesting Mezcals to be consumed that, whereas tequila, you can barrel age it and you can maybe produce an estate bottled product, but it's pretty generic at some level, right? Whereas Mezcal is just tons of variety.
Awesome. And you do have a bunch of varieties. Obviously, the fifth one that we're going to talk about later, but with the other four, some of which I was able to try at the event, can you just give us a quick rundown? And I guess which one of those main four are really your favorite?
Well, so we vowed not to just make stuff up, right? And think that we had this supernatural power to guess what consumers want. So we have listened to our consumers, and we've listened to our distributor trade partners based on what the market is telling us. So if there's a gap in the category and there's a consumer looking for that product that may not exist, we've been very open to listen and get feedback and go see if we can make a really good product, high quality and good value. So we started with Fernando's Family's Recipe. That's a silver, unaged, Joven, 81 proof, 100% Espadín. That was our first product. We had one of our initial customers in the Bay Area in California reach out for us and ask if we could make a higher proof, silver. And we're like, okay. So we went about testing 5 different proof levels and determined that the 102 proof was the sweet spot. And basically, it's a narrower cut of the heart. So the 81 and the 102 are similar, but as you crank up alcohol content or proof, it's like your amplifier on your stereo. When you crank that up, the music's louder, right? So with alcohol content, you're just basically amplifying what's in that bottle. So it's just got more expressive flavors. It's more bold. And so we made it. And for the aficionado consumer, that really resonated. The 81 silver is really to bring new consumers into the category, and for experienced consumers that, want a little bit less alcohol content. So those two really attract different types of customers, right? So similar situation, we had a request to make a reposado, which is a rested in oak product. So the requirements for resting, minimum requirements, are the same for tequila and mezcal. It's a minimum of 2 months. Fernando was very careful with aging mezcal because he did not want the maguey or the agave characteristics to be overreached by wood, right? So he wanted the agave to come through and then have the wood notes as a supporting cast as opposed to the main character. So a lot of, many times when you age products, the natural characteristics just get stepped on. So he said, let's go give it a try. So we launched our reposado. It's aged between 3 and 4 months. We do everything by taste, not by time. The CRM actually seals those barrels for 2 months. We can't touch them. 2 months and 1 day, the CRM comes out, does a lab sample, does a measurement, make sure nothing's been tampered with, and then we actually get control of the barrel. And then we start tasting, every 5 to 7 days from that point forward until we feel like we've got what we want in terms of flavor. And we actually age in American oak, but they are used barrels. And those used barrels are purchased in Mexico. We deconstruct them and we take the charring down to the natural wood and then rechar them the way we want them. So we know that we're going to have a consistent flavor profile, and we know the barrels are done exactly the way we want them done. So we make an añejo, which is 14 months in barrels, 86 proof. So our fifth, we'll talk about Pechuga Mole, which came about really by pairing traditions. Mole obviously is very, very much a part of Oaxaca culinary scene. And Pechuga is a very common celebratory product. So when somebody celebrates a life experience, the mezcalero will make a special batch. And it usually is Pechuga meaning breast. So there's some protein that's used in distilling. And we decided for our 5th business anniversary, we would pair a negro mole recipe from Fernando's family, which operates a popular restaurant in Oaxaca City. And we chose chicken. So we basically distill the first time like we would normally distill. The second round of the distillation, there are 6 chickens that are beheaded and the feet and feathers are taken off, and they go into the still and are basically evaporating at about 175 degrees. So the chicken gives a nice viscosity, mouthfeel, roundness to it. And then very slowly we bring the temperature down and we add the negro mole so we don't overboil the pot. So the mole is chilies, chocolate, cinnamon, plantain, almonds, raisins, some bread meal. And that, along with the chickens, distill. And we're at 92 proof when it's finished. So it takes about 3 days to make the mole from scratch. And it takes about 1.5 times longer to go through the distilling process, just because of all the molecules that are running through the still. We have to be very careful with it.
It's interesting looking at your website, seeing the pictures of making the mole, and yes, there's a picture of a chicken going in. It's kind of wild. And with all of these, especially the mole, which was a massive, massive hit on social media at the event, are those all available here in the state of Florida? Where can people generally find those?
Yeah, you can find them at Total Wine and More. They essentially carry almost all of them in most of their locations, and restaurants around the state of Florida. I mean, Rocco's Tacos would be one that would come to mind. They have numerous locations, and they've been a big supporter of ours from the beginning. And any restaurant or bar that is serving craft cocktails.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time, and thank you so much for the mezcal. And I'll be putting the information up on the show notes. Like I said, it's got a lot of great information on the website. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you, and I hope to meet up with you again soon.
So Xicaru is available here in the state of Florida. You may have to search around for it a little bit, mostly down in the Miami area, but it is available. Trust me, out of the expressions that I tried at the event, every single one of them was fantastic. If I could have left with several bottles, trust me, I would have. We're going to be doing a couple more interviews with some mezcal importers on the next episode of the Florida Beer Podcast. Don't worry, we'll get back to your fermented malt and hops and water and yeast very, very soon. In the meantime, hope you did enjoy it. If you want to get some more information on Xicaru, you can find it in our show notes, along with everything else you need to follow the Florida Beer Podcast on the social medias of your choice. Our intro announcer is Jeff Brozovich. Field producer is Steve Picala. Executive producer for Florida Podcast Network and Grand High Poobah is Jemmy Lagonier. Make sure to follow us on the podcasting app of your choice. If you can, leave us a nice 5-star review. It really does help us get the word out about Florida craft beer and even Mexico craft mezcal. Thank you so much. We will be back next week for another episode of the Florida Beer Podcast and our last episode featuring mezcal for a little while. In the meantime, this is Dave, your host and author. Thank you so much for listening in, and drink Florida craft.